Today we're going to talk about the labor defaults, and it's something that's a little tough to do with the software because labor is so personalized that a lot of people do it their own way, they use their own method, but we've tried to come up with the most universal settings, I guess, that we can to calculate labor, and to give you kind of the ability to adjust those settings, easily. And like everything else in GDS, we're actually using the latest version, v15.2.5. We just put out an update for this a few days ago, and if you don't have that now, you should get that. It's got some improvements, some additions, a couple of fixes, so good thing to have. And we're going to use the TrueLight catalog. It doesn't really matter with labor what catalog we're using, but that's what we're going to be looking at. And so let's take a look at the labor defaults. I just have our sample job with 3 elevations. I think just throughout the videos we've been adding some elevations here and there, but so yeah, we're going to talk about labor defaults. So this is our labor defaults menu. Something new for the 0.5 update, I believe, I don't think it was there in 0.4, is the ability to choose between the number of cuts that the program's going to calculate. So the program has always figured the cuts by component. So, a vertical that meets a head would be 1 cut and also 1 joint. And say a horizontal that is in between 2 verticals, that's 2 cuts. So that is one way of looking at it, per component. The other way of looking at it is, let's say a horizontal has 3 parts. It consists of 3 parts. A back member, a filler, a glass top, that kind of thing. So if that horizontal has 3 parts and you're cutting all those pieces individually, technically a horizontal now has 6 cuts because each side of it with 3 different parts. So you can now decide how you want the labor to calculate cuts, and the typical way or the default way is by component, and then the optional way would be checking this box, and then the program's going to figure it by each piece of material. So and since it is so new, now I'm forgetting how it, so if we check that box, then we would have to re-optimize, I believe. Now I can't remember if you need to redraw the elevation. So it might be something you check and leave for good. It seems like you would. It's not something you're going to turn off and on, so you either do it one way or the other. But if you do turn it on, I would say turn it on before you start creating a job. And you'll see it obviously then. If it's an old job, you might have to go through and redraw each elevation, like just by skipping next and previous or whatever, because that's the point that it figures the cuts when it draws the elevation. So and then the optimizer, well, then it would update the labor count when you actually process your labor and all that. So, or the calculation for that. So okay, let's go ahead and look at our labor defaults. So this menu here was added a little while ago, I'd say a year or 2 ago. You gave the ability to you to add more types of labor frames. So, and this is really what impacts the configuration that you're making for a certain type of labor. So you're basically naming a frame type and setting all the values and the configuration of that labor calculation. So instead of just adding a brand new frame from scratch, basically you can copy a frame and then just edit the name and edit the values, like the dollar values or the minute values, that kind of thing. So that's how you can kind of create more labor frame types. Now the relationship between this and a job is, let's close this here and close this, is that the framing system that you're actually using has a frame type. And that actually is meant not only to describe the frame, but also to determine what labor is going to be used. So that's why we say used in labor calcs. So if you do add a new frame type in your labor defaults window, then you'll want to select that labor type or frame type in a certain framing system that needs to use those labor values. So keep that in mind. That's the correlation between those labor frame types and the actual framing system that you're using for elevations in a job. So you know, these are the ones we have now, and those are going to be the same labor types, frame types that show up in the list. If we get back into labor defaults here and go back to our frame labor defaults, these are the exact same ones. So I could copy a frame by clicking this. The arrow right now is on the butt glazed number 5 frame type, so that's the one it's going to copy. And this is where it tells me I need to, you know, edit the settings. So really all it's going to do is call it copy of butt glaze. But you know, so I could call it anything. I could call it you know, louvered panel system or something. So whatever you want to call it, and then we can edit that. Now let's see if that picks that up if I don't save it first. Yeah. So louvered panels. So now I'm into the screen, just like all the other, if we clicked on any other frame type, this is the screen that would come up where we have our, and right now remember it's just a copy of the butt glaze that I had. So this is where we have our hourly rates. And not to jump around too much, but we can actually, if all we want to do is edit some hourly rates instead of, you know, and not have to go in and change all our minute values for all the different labor tasks, we can do that here without getting into the edit screen. So you can adjust the name or edit the name, and you can edit the hourly rates in this window. Now in this window is where you get into more detail. So we could do the hourly rates, and this is where we do all the minutes. So it's broken up into 3 main sections: installation labor, fabrication, and just miscellaneous. And miscellaneous is applied to just the elevation in general. So it's not specific to, so it's not variable. It's kind of a fixed time value for an elevation. So that's what miscellaneous. So it's added vinyl time, because vinyl time is basically the glazing of the glass. So if we jump over to here where it says job and elevation settings, well, normally that would show up if we were processing labor and editing labor for a job. That's the one thing that changes in this window. We would see our glazing labor right here. So glazing labor is actually off of the main menu, so we'll talk about that later. But glazing labor is figured in its own way with a rack schedule, and if you need additional gasket or vinyl time, then you would add it in here. If it's something that the glazing labor wasn't accounting for and you knew there was extra time needed for some perimeter sealing, or you know, some extra vinyl that's needed for something special, then put the time in. So glass cutting, if you cut your own glass, the GDS labor doesn't calculate glass cutting. So, and remember, we're looking at the defaults here. So if we set all this stuff up in the defaults, every time we use this type of, every time we create a job that has a framing system that is set to this frame type for labor, it's going to pick up the defaults that we've entered in here. You can always edit all these values after you've created your job and after you've processed your labor. You can edit them and reprocess, but the defaults are automatic. So whatever you set here is going to come up automatically with. So if you always cut your own glass, the problem with that is obviously it's variable. It depends on how many lights of glass there are in an elevation. So it would be hard to put that value in accurately every time, so it's something you would actually have to add for each elevation in each job. So added caulking. You can figure perimeter caulking here, but added caulking would be whatever that perimeter caulking doesn't account for. So you can kind of see this is just miscellaneous extra stuff that's not accounted for by all the variable settings here. So now let's talk about these settings. So installation labor. This is always in minutes, as we say here. for single transom or single door with transom, basically it's up to how your shop does it. If you assemble your frame in the shop and then just tilt it in an elevation, then your labor is going to be different than someone that actually cuts, I mean not cuts, but drills and miters and does things that or mortises for locks and things on the field. So it depends on what you're doing, installation-wise with your shop as opposed to someone else. I mean, some of that stuff is fabrication, so you need to decide what time is required on the field for the way that you install doors with transoms. So that's why it's so personalized with the labor here. So I was talking to one client or one customer who does most of their fabrication, and all the panels are assembled and things in the shop. So a lot of their labor is in fabrication because it's all done in the shop, and then the installation is just tilting it up and glazing. So there's not a lot of screwing horizontals in, screwing heads in, things like that that other shops might do in the field. So that's where it depends. In their case, fabrication was a lot higher, installation was a lot lower. If someone's doing a lot of that cutting and drilling in the field, then you could say that your installation is actually higher. But you could still divide it up. So you have to play with it and kind of tweak these numbers. So if 300 minutes, so 3 hours is 180 minutes. So that's quite a bit of time with a transom. So if your shop only takes 200 minutes, then go ahead and adjust that and see how the labor comes out at this dollar rate. And it's kind of a trial and error process to get these defaults dialed in. So, but you can see the relationship. A no transom single door is obviously going to take less time than one with a transom. Same thing with a pair. A pair is going to take more time than a single. Now there is some miscellaneous values here that you can add. So your door hardware time, like I say, if you're doing all that door hardware stuff as fabrication in the shop, then you don't really need to account for that for installation time. Now door adjusting, that's always going to be installation, just to make sure that the hinges are set right and it's hanging right. But so you can add that in, or you can just include that time in your regular installation for the type of entrance it is. So again, you're going to have to decide how you want to break that down, and then if the value's coming out too high when we process our labor, then you need to adjust these numbers down a little bit. So the best thing to do is to take a simple job that you've done, and you know exactly how long labor took, installation, fabrication, and any type of setup or any miscellaneous stuff, and then get it so the program comes out right on with that type of job. And then the next time you do a job, you're using the right values that worked before, and then you're going to see how they do with the next job. So the one thing that the variable values here, like time per joint, if you have this dialed in for one job, but then it's a little different for the next, you may decide you need a little adjustment, like you change this from 11 to 10 minutes per joint, but then your time per panel either could go up or down. So chances are, if your time per joint was adjusted down, you might want your time per panel to go up a little bit. So, and you know what we're saying here with time per panel. So each column is a panel, but panels can vary because some panels may have 5 horizontals, some may have 2, some may have 10. So the time per panel is slightly variable because the number of panels per elevation changes, but it doesn't really account for horizontals, which is something that joints actually accounts for well. So, and then the same thing goes with time per elevation. If you have these two numbers adjusted well for most of your jobs, but then there's some jobs that come up that seem like they're taking longer, or it's underpricing, then you can use time per elevation as kind of a factor to add in. And this can be used also, time per elevation can be used for anchoring, let's say, for anchoring wall jambs. You know, if time per joint and time per panel isn't accounting for that, then you can say, okay, I need 30 minutes to anchor wall jambs left and right. So that might be something that you can do. And then you could say, if I'm accounting for that, then I only need 20 minutes per panel. So because the verticals are a little quicker to put in. So those are the type of adjustments you can make. Now, curtain wall pressure plate. So this value here is only used for curtain wall pressure plate. And as you can see when I point to it, enter the time it takes per foot to install pressure plate material. So the program is going to take lineal feet of the entire elevation, so every lineal foot of the elevation, and multiply it by the number of minutes that you enter here. Now, if you add a value here and it's not a curtain wall system, it's still going to calculate the time for you. So keep that in mind. It's kind of it's there if you need it for any non-curtain wall systems, but you want this value set for curtain wall systems because that'll help you account for pressure plate time. So, and perimeter caulking. So this is another by the foot type thing. So the program already figures your perimeter footage for an elevation. So all you need to tell it is how many minutes per foot it takes to apply the caulking. So, you know, if I want to just say 1, then that's plenty. I think you could probably even put in a 0.5. So yeah, if you need a half a minute per foot, it can take that. So that's installation labor. And you can see where I'm going with this. It's kind of a trial and error. You're tweaking one number, tweaking another to get the end result as close as possible to what you actually do on the field. And as I say, the best thing you can do is take a job that you know exactly how long, you know, if everything went well, or even if it's got the regular amount of problems that come up because nothing goes perfect, then you take a job like that, you see how much exact time and how much money you spent on labor, and then get the program to calculate about the same value for that job. And that's a good starting point. And then if you need to, you go in and start tweaking the different values to get it to adapt more to every other job. So same thing goes with fabrication. So if you are, you know, cutting your door jambs, door head, transom stop, if you're mortising, you know, hinge except, you know, places to put hinges on the frame, if you're drilling for locks, if you're doing all that stuff for your doors, then you'd want to put that time in here. And that would, you know, you can separate it under hardware time so that you know, okay, this is what I'm spending on hardware time, this is what I'm spending on cutting and prepping the frame, you know, for the rest of the door. So that's for the fabrication of an entrance. And I'm not sure why this one, I've probably been playing with this so much it doesn't have any standard values in there. But so time per cut, it's just like time per joint, only the cuts are a little bit different. And this is something that I mentioned back in the main labor default menu where we added that checkbox. This value is going to increase or whatever time you put here per cut is obviously going to affect the end result based on how many cuts there are. So if you do the check the box that says use actual piece cuts instead of component cuts, then your fabrication time is going to be a lot higher. So you would want to know that going into it, that if you're cutting individual pieces or extrusions as opposed to, you know, saying I want to cut an assembly and consider that one cut, then you want to make sure that your time per cut is appropriate for that type of scenario. So because the program's going to basically come up with a lot more cuts if you tell it, give me a count for the number of pieces being cut. So so just a note on that. Time per joint. So fabrication per joint on a screw spline, maybe, you know, drilling the holes, it wouldn't take that much time. So there's not going to be a lot of or even a shear block system, maybe a couple holes drilled, so you only need like 2 minutes, not 15. So time per panel is just like it was for installation. If these two values aren't getting you close enough for a variety of jobs, then you'd want to add like a little fudge factor for time per panel. So if you're coming out a little bit low on some, a little bit high on others, then you can play with the time per panel and adjust these numbers too. So if you need an extra, and this is an example of when a company does a lot of the assembly into panels in their shop before the job is taken to the field, before the material is taken to the field, then you can actually take advantage of this. But because if you're assembling your panels, you could say every panel's got a head and a sill, and the joint and cut times are going to basically cover you for horizontals. You could say, you need 15 minutes here or 20 or whatever for fabrication of panels. So, with this and the two cut and joint values, that gives you the variable calculation you need for different sized panels, and you can get it done that way. And then for fabrication for time per elevation, you can actually do, let's say it, requires jigging or setting up saws or tearing down or cleanup. You could always say, a fudge factor of 60 minutes for time per elevation, if that's something you want to include there. So, and that's something that miscellaneous elevation labor can also include is, if there's a certain amount of time that you want to say is for cleanup or for prepping stuff, you can put it down in this miscellaneous section too. So, and then that's another thing that we get to over here under job and elevation settings, is this is job specific labor. So this applies no matter how big the job is, no matter how many elevations there are. You can apply by default a given value of labor to a certain type of category needed for that job. So, and I think we just threw in this $500 for layout just for fun, so that you know that there's something there for the job that you can tweak. You can actually type in your own description, and you could say truck rental or something like that. Now that's something you can actually add into your markup report, but if you want to include it in your labor, you can do it, sure enough. And like I say, there can be a default if you always have to rent a truck to deliver, deliver material. You can put a value in for that that's always there. Otherwise, on a job basis, you can just go in and make adjustments to these values. So that's what that's for. So, and the way this screen works, right now we're looking at that louvered panels one that I created. That was just a name I made up. But I can skip to, that might be at the end. So I can skip to other ones, and it should be in alphabetical order. So this is how I would just skip over to get to another system, like there's the butt glaze. Or I can hit OK, and then I can go up to butt glaze here and double-click it and get to the same screen. So I can kind of skip around, or like I say, I can get out and go to this screen and pick the one I want. So now, if we close that, and I close this, and we go to our framing systems, and let's say I'm just looking at copy elevation. Must have been messing around with that. I just look at any frame here. Then I should be able to go here and pick my louvered panels labor type. So that's how, if we did create that new labor group or labor frame type and configure all the values, then I have to go and pick it in a frame, and then I can say, okay, that's now the labor setting or type that I need for this type of system. From then on, when I pick this system, it's going to use that labor setting. So so that's how that works. So then the next concept is when we go to our labor for the job, we are actually, so this job, whatever frame, whatever labor type these frames for this job are set at, when I hit this button, either apply or reapply labor defaults, it's going back to the labor defaults, looking at that frame type, pulling in all those values, and saving them to this job. So it's the same concept as everything else in GDS, where you've got your master defaults and you've got your job level values. So same thing with labor. Now that I've applied the defaults, they're applied to the job, and I can go in and edit those values separately. So here I can change just for this job. I can say my miscellaneous labor is 50, installation's 45. So all these things I can change. I can say I need 60 minutes time per elevation, and so on. So now the difference is I'm changing this per elevation. So it's not really, because each elevation might have a different framing system, which would have a different labor frame type. So I would have to go through and make those changes to each elevation if I want it consistent. Otherwise, you can even vary it by elevation if you need to. Like if that elevation needed 60 minutes but this one doesn't, then I can leave it 0. If for that matter, if your glazing rate is 45 for this elevation and 35 for the other, you could even do that. But that probably wouldn't happen, but that's possible. So that's how it works with the job level labor. So I can go in here and tweak these. And this is where, this is where I want to go in and get to my final glass here. So I'm going to get to my final glass and close. Oh, I didn't process the labor. Let's process the labor. So I applied the defaults already, and I edited a couple of the defaults that were already applied to this job. And now I want to process it. So it says process successfully. Now I can go back in, look at my defaults, look at my actual elevation labor settings, and then I should see my glazing labor. So this is where this screen was a little different than the defaults screen. It shows this section right here. So it shows my glazing labor. It shows my cut count, my joint count, the number of doors there are, and then over here it would show me the totals. So it would give me a total for all the different categories for one elevation, and then if this elevation is multiplied, has a quantity of 3 or 4, then it would just use that value here and multiply it out for a total for this elevation and all its quantities. So that's how the labor works. And then when I print the report, the same thing. It shows me all that information in columns here. And the added labor is where that extra $500 was there. Remember how it was put in twice for the job? Now, if I wanted to get back to that and edit it for this job, I would actually go back here to this middle tab. And now this, I should be able to only change it once, so I don't have to go to each elevation since it is job level. So let's do that. We're changing it so only the truck rental's there. Oops. Let's go back to that. And then, that won't show up under elevation totals, so yeah. Let's go ahead and just print final labor and see what it does. So yeah, you don't even have to process. You can just go into the report and it just pulls that value. So, because what it's done is, you see right here, it's the 500 for the job. What it's done is it's made a copy of the labor default, so it made a copy of the job level labor and stuck it in to associate with this job. And as soon as we go in here and click on this tab, we're looking at that copy of those defaults. So we change it here, hit OK, it's already saved it for the job, and then when we print it, the report is just going and seeing what's there. So it's pulling those numbers from that labor setting for this job. So now this export to GTS, if you use the Glazer's edition of the GTS GlassPack software, then if you check this box and hit print, it will give you this error. So I might have to look at that. This is a fairly new feature for GTS, so fortunately I don't think that's going to hold anyone up right now, but I'll get that fixed. So basically it just creates a like a CSV file that can be opened with Excel, or it can be imported with GTS. So that's what that's for. And if you do want to get your labor summary in Excel, I think we can actually, let's go back here. So your labor summary, export options. Yeah, you can actually export it to PDF or to Excel anyway. So that's kind of there to begin with. And then if you check those boxes and you were to hit, let's go back to labor. If you were to hit print labor final summary and those boxes were checked, it would create the PDF file, create the Excel file for you. And remember, those files, let's go here. We'd go to WinBidPro. We'd go to, we're using our TrueLight catalog, and it would be put in either an Excel and or a, it's like here's where the GTS file would go. So it gave me an error, yeah, so it didn't put the data in the file, but it created it, so I got to look at that. So what it would do is it would put an Excel file in there, and then if it was PDF, it'd be the same thing. So that's where you'd find those files if you had them exported. So let's see. So that's pretty much how the labor would work. You have your defaults. You tweak those so they come out as close as they can for most jobs, and then you can edit those defaults by elevation, and in the case of job level labor, you can edit it here. Now the one thing we didn't really talk much about is glazing labor, so I'm going to touch on that, and then the next video we'll talk about that even more. The next webinar. So this is where it comes up with the total pieces of glass for this elevation. So this is the first elevation, and then it's coming up with how many minutes. So let's see where all that comes from. So we go close out of this, and this is something that you don't really have job level editing ability with. So it's really only a defaults thing. So and this is like program wide. So if we set our glazing labor, it's for the entire program. It's not for each individual vendor. And it's also not for each individual job. So it is the one thing that's kind of global. So the way it works is the labor for glazing depends on the thickness of the glass and the type of frame it's being set in. So here we have one list of the rack schedule. So, and it's based on a rack schedule. It's figuring out the, what is it called? United inches, I guess. I think it was united inches. The length plus the width of the glass. And if that falls from 0 to 50, so if it's 20 inches wide, 20 inches tall, it's 40 united inches. So that would fall in here. And it comes up with half a man because basically it's not going to take the same, you figure it's going to take a little less time, even if one man can do a 80-inch united inch piece of glass that's only, up to 5/16, so that's 1/4 inch thickness. He can do that a little quicker. He can do a 40 united inch piece of glass, glaze that a little bit quicker than he could an 80 united inch piece of glass. So we made it so when it multiplies 0.5 times your labor rate of $45, then it's going to basically give you half the time, or half the end result, half the price. So that's why this is 0.5. So now here's the correlation. First of all, it has to know what thickness of glass. So when you put your glass in your elevation, there is a thickness that's in the glass table that the labor part of the program is referencing. And then it has to know what type of framing system you're putting in. So you'll recognize this list. This is the list of frame types that we set in our labor defaults. So when it sees that, it basically has a set of numbers that have been assigned. So let's say it's shear block or screw spline. So let's go ahead and get out of here. And we're going to look and see what setting. So this was a screw spline. I'm pretty sure all the elevations are a screw spline on this one. Let's just check one more. So it's screw spline, okay. And then for the glass that we've set, I've set the same glass in the whole frame. It's 1/4 inch glass. So this is where the labor looks. It's a 0.25 inch thickness of glass, and it's screw spline. So now we go back to labor defaults. We go to our edit glazing labor, and this is where we're looking at this section of the rack schedule, and then we have to go to screw spline here. Now what's important here is that we're matching up this number of men values with this column here. If there is a match, like if there's a 0.5 here and a 0.5 here, then this is where it knows. So this is the reason we have the 0.5. It's another way of telling the program how many minutes are required. So if it was 1 here, then it's always going to say it takes 33 minutes, even if it was a 30 United inch piece of glass. But since we wanted to tell it takes less time, we created the 0.5 men, even though logically it doesn't make sense. We created the 0.5 men item here so that we can tell it takes less time. So, I mean, for that matter, we could have had a 0.75, and 0.75 could have equaled 22 minutes, So that's how it works. Now, the thing is, this is pretty fixed. You can adjust some things here. So this is what we'll talk about in the next webinar. We're actually over time now. So we'll get into this. We'll run some examples and we'll look at them. And we'll also run some examples by changing some of the values here, so you can see how it all kind of figures out. But for now, in a nutshell, that's where all the labor comes from in this program. So the labor defaults, the glazing rack schedule, the frame type, and the thickness of glass. Those are all key things in the labor. And so the next video in 2 weeks will be on Tuesday. And what we'll do is we'll go in, we'll really look into the glazing labor a little bit more, and we'll run some jobs, make some changes, and you'll see how it affects the bottom line for labor. So we'll do that in 2 weeks, and I will put a webinar out for this by tomorrow. All right, thanks for joining us.